My brother Bill is in the army now. We heard from him today. His waistline's getting back to normal now. Here's what he had to say. Ma, I miss your apple pie. Ma, I miss your stew. Ma.
Hello and welcome to Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes. Episode 3, We're in the Army Now. During the 1990s, while serving as a teacher with the Department of Defense dependent schools in Bad Kreuznach, Germany, my young family and I visited many of the sites associated with World War II, the beaches of Normandy where D-Day took place, the Ardennes Forest where the Battle of the Bulge was waged, and the concentration camps of Dachau, Buchenwald, and Auschwitz. We realized just what was at stake in World War II when not only the survival of the United States, but of democracy and human rights throughout the world was in the balance. I began writing to veterans to thank them for their sacrifices. I also encouraged them to share their stories with me so that I could keep them alive, passing them on to the students I taught. For every letter I wrote, I received far more responses than expected, as veterans passed my letters on to their buddies and printed them in reunion newsletters. I eventually was corresponding with 140 World War II veterans, including over 20 Medal of Honor recipients. I had more material than I could ever use in class, so to keep my promise to them, I wrote Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes, which this series of podcasts is based upon. Millions of young Americans reacted to the Japanese surprise attacks at Pearl Harbor and in the Pacific, as did Leo Red Gavitt of Staten, Michigan. I had a 2B classification, men necessary to national defense, when the war broke out in Europe. I wasn't too concerned at the time because I felt there was enough to take care of Hitler. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, that was a whole different story. I was tending bar on Sunday to help out a friend. The word came in that the Japs had attacked Pearl. I took off my apron and told the owner to take over because I was leaving to go home and get ready to go. Gavin enlisted in the Navy, where he served on a destroyer, the USS John C. Butler, and earned 5 battle stars for Western New Guinea, Leyte, Luzon, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Married, and already a father, Alex Burdas of Kinston, North Carolina, thought he was exempt from service in World War II. Burdas had married his high school sweetheart shortly after graduating from high school on June 20th, 1938. The couple had their first daughter just 5 months before Pearl Harbor occurred. Now supporting a young family, Burdas thought he would remain exempt from the service for the duration of the war. Then the call came on from his local draft board. I reported for duty on April 4th, 1944, and I was sworn in the very same day that the newspaper headlines read, "Married men with children exempt from the draft." Needless to say, many of us were overwhelmed by these headlines, and we asked to talk with someone to see if we could be released. The answer we received was, "You're in the armed forces now. The only choice you have is what branch you wish to serve." We were given the option to choose the Army, the Navy, or the Marines. The Air Force was no longer accepting recruits. So, unlike Burdas, Joe Lawn of Port Lavaca, Texas, was given his first choice and was able to serve in the Army Air Force. Despite high casualty numbers, many of those who served in the Air Force felt, as Lawn did, that he was always thankful that I was in the air and not a foot soldier. Those people won the war, and the Jap soldiers were real jungle fighters, as were our soldiers. When Milburn Henke of Hutchinson, Minnesota, enlisted in the National Guard so that he could beat the draft, he could not have predicted that he would soon achieve fame as the first U.S. soldier to set foot on European soil. When the National Guard was inducted into the regular army in January 1941, Henke was shipped to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, where he began 1 year's training with Company B of the 135th Infantry 34th Division. By January 15, 1942, the 135th, which was combined with the 133rd to make a full regiment, was deemed battle-ready and set sail for Belfast, North Ireland, on the English ship, the HMS Strathard. As the ship pulled out of New York Harbor, Henke recalled all the young GIs lined its deck to take one last look at the Statue of Liberty, which none of us had ever seen before. Other than fighting overcrowded quarters, seasickness, and trying to figure out how to exchange their American dollars for British pounds, it was an uneventful voyage until they reached Newfoundland. Their escort of 6 American destroyers and a couple of battleships changed there to 4 English corvettes. "Did we ever get nervous then? They had a run in with a German sub. A lot of depth charges were thrown out, but we never heard it hit or the sub get away. Not one in the convoy, though, was touched." After 11 days at sea, the HMS Strathard reached the harbor at Belfast, North Ireland, on the morning of January 26, 1942. A small ferry boat brought Henke and his company to dock. That was when things became strange. A colonel walked up to Henke's Lieutenant Springer and told him he wanted an enlisted man from Company B, 133rd Infantry. Because Henke was sitting close to Lieutenant Springer, he was told to go along with the colonel. As Henke followed the colonel towards the gangplank, he realized that this was no normal unloading. Private First Class Milburn Henke was about to become the first U.S. soldier to set foot on European soil in World War II. He asked me if I could talk to reporters, and I said, "I can if I have to." General Hartley was waiting there and shook my hand and said, "Let's go." I knew then that this was really going to be something different. As I reached the end of the gangplank, they began playing our national anthem. We stopped and we saluted. I then stepped off the gangplank and I shook hands with Prime Minister Churchill and representatives of the British government. Everything happened pretty fast after that. Lots of pictures were taken. I walked off the gangplank 6 times to satisfy photographers to get all the pictures they wanted. After all the hoopla, Henke joined the rest of his company at their billets. But a few days later, he was sent back to Belfast to be interviewed by John McVaney for the NBC Radio Broadcasting Network. Henke didn't mind being interviewed, especially since it gave him the opportunity to talk with his family and girlfriend. Henke's notoriety as the first American soldier on European soil continued during training. Henke was told by Lieutenant Springer that a reporter and photographer would be following him around at training and to allow them to take as many pictures as they wanted. They represented Look, Life, and the British Illustrated magazines. He was there all day and came back the next day. We had a pass to go into town and take pictures with the local people. All these pictures were published in the British magazine Illustrated for the week ending February 21st, 1942. After that, it was then back to normal, and the summer was spent in training. But Henke was called to London, England for a Navy Day broadcast in September. While there, he was introduced to the visiting First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and to the Queen Mother, Elizabeth. Henke took advantage of the opportunity to advocate for his fellow soldiers. I brought up about the GIs needing warm socks because of the cool English weather. Scheduled for a few more local radio broadcasts, Henke was able to spend some free time roaming around London. By the end of the year, the first U.S. soldier to set foot on European soil in World War II had returned to being just another infantryman training for the invasion into North Africa. Whether they were drafted or enlisted, the young men who went to fight in World War II were given approximately 12 weeks of basic training. Samuel Erlick of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, described the experience. Basic training consisted mainly of long hikes with combat packs or full packs, drills of marching lectures on different combat maneuvers, hand grenade and rifle qualification, compass and map reading, kitchen or latrine duty, and a final field tent week overnight in the woods. Physical training consisted of half-hour exercise daily and running an obstacle course. I thought I was in good shape at the age of 18. However, I started at 149 pounds and I got down to 139 pounds after basic. After joining the 104th Regiment, 26th Division, I entered a new phase of training, which pointed towards actual combat conditions. Rifle marksmanship and short field problems were emphasized. Learning to fire machine guns, Browning automatic rifles, rifle grenades, flamethrowers, and carbines were more interesting. Since I was classified as a rifleman, mortar and heavy machine guns were not part of my training, but handled by the men in the heavy weapons platoon. Our regiment moved to Tennessee maneuvers, east of Nashville, for 9 weeks of intensive combat problems. Maneuvers were rough, accompanied by rain and snow and mud, just like combat with no hot lead flying around. We marched through a blacked-out countryside, forded small streams, ate K rations, and slept in the mud. We wore bands of blue, and we fought against those who wore bands of red on their steel helmets. Umpires scored us on success or failure of our actions. After maneuvers ended, we talked and we rode to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and we lived in tar paper hutments. At Fort Jackson, training centered around competition for the Expert Infantry Badge, a series of vigorous tests, obstacle and infiltration courses, military and weapons, proficiency examinations, foot races, physical exercises, and a 25-mile hike with a full pack at about 60 pounds. Designed to show superior achievement in carrying a $5 raise in pay for successful candidates. The other training was at Camp Shanks, New York, prior to shipping out overseas. Drills in physical hardening, abandoning ship, bayonet practice, intelligence training on processing of information, identification of enemy personnel, and aircraft spotting. I believe the training was adequate for combat. If you kept down and you were lucky, you just might survive. The assignments young recruits received were based on more than just how they performed in the field. Intelligence tests also played a role. Lloyd Huggins of Petersburg, Virginia, a former colonel in the Army, recalled infantry regiments, particularly rifle companies, as being comprised of the soldiers who were considered less influential, the least educated, and therefore the most expendable of our nation to do most of the suffering and dying. The practice continued, despite studies which revealed that the better educated had a greater chance for survival in combat arms. Colonel Huggins recalled the more technical services got the first pick of recruits, followed by the airborne divisions. The infantry was the last, he recalled. As an officer, Colonel Huggins found that some of his British counterparts could not understand how he got away with a system that did not treat all men equally. Apparently, the British system did. During training, or during the combat that followed, GIs often acquired nicknames of some sort. Clarence Taylor of Lebanon, Indiana, recalled how nicknames were bestowed upon soldiers. Many times these were related to something entirely unrelated to their experience as foot sloggers, perhaps an eating oddity, which they may draw the name of Grunter. Then maybe one such as the one bestowed on one of the men in our communication team, Mudball. This he received because of his always being covered with some form of mud, even when there had been no rain. Foxholes were mostly dry, but somehow or other not his. Then, too, there were those who served to address a man's performance. One man in my radio section was a man always first to the .30 caliber machine gun, mounted on our radio jeep, to fire at enemy aircraft attacking us. For this he was known as Machine Gun Kelly. His actual name was Adam Kasuki. In addition to getting their nicknames and basic training, soldiers often learned macabre skills. Gordon E. King of Merrill, Wisconsin, recalled some of the training he received as a paratrooper with the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division as downright chilling. How to get a sentry with a piano wire, how to break his back with a blow from an entrenching tool, where to strike so he would die soundlessly, how to use your teeth, your thumbs, your knees on vital spots, to be sure to hold the trench knife close in front of you, thumbs up, cut and slash, how to break his arm and kill him with his own knife. Colonel Sen, commander of the regiment since its painful birth in the hills of Georgia, reminded us, "Y'all ain't going over there to die for your country. You're going over there to make that other SOB die for his." Basic training took place 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, with the only day off being Sunday. In basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, Murray Shapiro of Chatsworth, California, was pretty disappointed when Sunday came and he went to the nearest town, Columbus, Georgia. He described Columbus, Georgia, in a letter written at the time, "A dead place. They have blue laws here which could close everything up on Sunday. One cannot even buy a Sunday paper. It must be bought on the previous Saturday." Arnold Dutch Nagel of Delphos, Ohio, volunteered for the newly formed parachute troop when he joined the Army in September of 1942 because of the extra $50 per month jump pay they offered. In addition, paratroopers received distinctive uniforms. He did his basic training at Camp Wheeler in Macon, Georgia, before going on to jump at Fort Benning, Georgia in January of 1943. The training for paratroopers was rigorous. After 3 days of calisthenics and jump training, we had to be able to run 5 miles and make 5 jumps in 5 days. In February of 1943, Nagel graduated from jump school and was assigned to Company C, 1st Squad, 1st Platoon, 505 of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. While there, Nagel participated in the first regimental mass air jump the U.S. Army ever conducted in March of 1943. The jump was marked by tragedy, as Nagel recalled. "One plane in the formation suddenly lost power, and it sliced through the troopers who had jumped in front of it, killing 3 troopers. A trooper had the chute cut off his back, but he pulled his reserve chute and he landed safely." The air jump training, that accident that Nagel witnessed, was far from unusual. Nearly 15,000 young men died in air training accidents without ever leaving the United States. When the paratroopers left Fort Bragg by train on April 20th, 1943, for Camp Edwards in Massachusetts, they were told to remove all identification from our uniforms and hide our boots under leggings so we would look like regular infantry. Less than a week after arriving at Fort Bragg, the 82nd became the first Airborne Division to serve on foreign soil when it boarded the USS Monterey on April 28, 1943, for North Africa. An estimated 200,000 American men and women served in World War II while being underage. This was despite the fact that the U.S. military only allowed people 18 and older to enlist without parental consent. Raymond E. Comroe of Durand, Wisconsin, became one of the youngest men to serve in World War II when he and his underage buddy quit school and altered their birth certificates so they could enlist at the young age of 16. Comroe was more motivated by necessity than patriotism. Comroe wiped away tears in a 1998 interview with me as he recalled his underage enlistment. "My mother couldn't afford us. My younger sister even went next door to rob the pantry of the neighbor to get us something to eat. I said, 'Mom, I can't put up with this anymore. I just wanted a roof over my head, and I thought I'd get some schooling in the Navy, too.'" Comro's divorce papers went along with their young son's ruse. His divorced parents went along with their young son's ruse, even signing his U.S. Navy enlistment papers. At that time, the U.S. government issued a $10,000 payment to parents if you were killed while in the military. Thus, being my parents were divorced, they would each receive $5,000 apiece, Comro explained. After a couple of weeks of training on the beaches of California, Comro found himself aboard a troop ship headed for the South Pacific. He soon went ashore at the Russell Islands. The first night on the island, Comro was assigned guard duty at a supply tent. The pitch-dark night was soon lit up when the Japanese dropped a 500-pound bomb near the strip where Comro was standing guard. No one was killed in the explosion, but Comro was left wondering what he had gotten himself into. The next morning, Comro was still pretty shaken up, and he went to his commanding officer and told him that he was underage. He said, "Son, there aren't any ships going home or any military planes. We'll be here for some time, and if I could get you back home when you turn 17, you'd be sent right back to this outfit." He gave me a few days to think this matter over, and after that, he acted like a father to me and took me under his wing. The CO hooked Comro up with an ensign, who told Comro he had shown an aptitude for mechanics. The ensign asked Comro if he'd like to be a truck driver and assigned to a mechanic pool. Driving a truck sounded like a great idea to Comro, and he decided he no longer wanted to go home. Comro didn't want to be a dead hero, so he knew he had to grow up fast. Even though he was still just 16 years old, Comro felt like he was now a man. After being halfway around the world before you're 20 years old, seeing many things at government expense, learning how to kill or be killed, wash my own clothes, shine my own shoes, make my own bed, stay clean and neat, I felt like a man. Even though 50 years later, Comro still would occasionally wake up screaming from a nightmare, and he could still see the flash of those bombs, he never regretted leaving home early for the military. Joseph Knupp of Glen Ellen, Illinois, was also underage when he enlisted. Because his father was a farmer and needed his help on the farm, Knupp hadn't gone on to high school. When the war came along, I thought being in the Army would be more fun than being on the farm. Knupp's combat experience was much shorter than most World War II veterans. Arriving at Camp Lucky Strike in March 1945, he spent just 6 weeks in combat as a gunner on an anti-tank squad in 1st Battalion Headquarters Company, 303rd Infantry, 97th Division. It was long enough to realize, though, just how wrong he'd been. War was hell. Even the farm looked a whole lot better to him after that.
Nobody's spoiling me like you used to do. They won't let me stay in bed till it's due. At 5:45, they play me a tune.
Our song today, Ma, I Miss Your Apple Pie, from Ambrose and his orchestra, was a big hit in World War II. This concludes this presentation of Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes. I hope you'll join us for our next podcast, When War Comes to the Pacific, and it'll tell the story of Jefferson DeBlanc, Medal of Honor recipient, who shot down 5 Japanese fighters in the Solomon Islands before he himself was captured by headhunters. Thank you again for joining.